Hey everyone, good to see you. Let me tell you something that should stop every American in their tracks. The men who served as Donald Trump's most senior, the case in military advisors, the generals and admiral, he personally selected to lead the most powerful armed forces on the planet. The people who sat in the Situation Room with him and witnessed his private decision-making and heard his private statements about the use of military power. Those men are now publicly warning the country that the president they served is a danger to the Constitution and a threat to American democracy itself. This is not political opposition. This is not partisan spin. This is Mark Milley, Trump's own chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military officer in the United States, describing Trump as fascist to the core and the most dangerous person to this country. This is James Mattis, Trump's own Secretary of Defense, one of the most respected Marine generals of his generation, saying Trump has made a mockery of the Constitution. A Voldel, this is John Kelly, Trump's own White House Chief of Staff, a 4-star Marine general, and a Gold Star father who lost his son in combat, confirming that Trump called fallen American troops suckers and losers, and discussing Trump's desire to use the military against domestic political opponents. The 3 most powerful military position in the American government, filled by the men Trump himself chose, are now united in warning the nation that the commander-in-chief represent a fundamental threat to the constitutional order. Republicans, they swore to defend, and if that doesn't make you sit up and pay attention, nothing will let me make sure the weight of each of these individual statements lands with the force it deserves. Mark Milley spent over 40 years in uniform, commanding soldiers in combat, advising presidents of both parties, and serving as the principal military advisor to the commander-in-chief. When he says Trump is fascist to the core, he is not making a casual remark. There's a mark. There's a mark when he is applying a professional military assessment to the president's character and concluding that Trump exhibits the defining characteristics of fascist governance, the cult of personality, the contempt for democratic institution, the willingness to use state power against political opponents, the subordination of all government functions to the leader's personal will. And when Milley says Trump is the most dangerous person to this country, he is making a threat assessment. He spent his career evaluating dangers from foreign adversaries and terrorist organization. He is saying that the president himself poses a greater threat to American security than any external enemy that is staggering. James Mattis is a Marine Corps legend. He commanded troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. He served as head of Central Command. He was confirmed as Secretary of Defense with overwhelming bipartisan support. And when he says Trump has made a mockery of the Constitution, he is speaking as someone who swore an oath to defend that document, who dedicated his entire adult life to serving the nation, and who concluded, after serving as Trump's defense secretary, that the president holds the Constitution in contempt. Mattis did not resign over a policy disagreement. He resigned because he concluded that Trump's approach to governance was fundamentally incompatible with the constitutional principles. Mattis spent his career defending. His subsequent public statements have only reinforced that judgment, describing a president who does not even pretend to unite Americans and who treats the rule of law as an obstacle rather than a foundation. John Kelly's testimony is perhaps the most devastating because it combines the authority of a 4-star general with the moral weight of a Gold Star father. Kelly lost his son Robert in Afghanistan. He knows what military sacrifice means. Arens, I or would you de history think ofly policy, which one of they? Well, I think verbally, I think he knows what families go through when they bury a child killed in service to their country And he has publicly confirmed that Trump called fallen American troops suckers and losers. He has verified the accounts that the president looked at the graves of American heroes and mocked them as fools for dying. That is not hearsay. That is not media spin. That is a Gold Star father, a retired Marine general, the man Trump chose as his chief of staff, telling the country that the president he served holds the military in contempt, and Kelly has added something even more alarming. He has confirmed that Trump discussed using the military against domestic political opponents, the President of the United States, according to his own chief of staff, contemplated deploying the armed forces against American citizens. Whose political views he disagreed with, that is not a policy disagreement. That is not a policy disagreement. That is the kind of conduct that defines authoritarian regimes. That is the use of military power as a tool of political repression rather than national defense. Think about what these three men are saying. Collectively, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs says Trump is a fascist and the most dangerous person in America. The Secretary of Defense says Trump has made a mockery of the Constitution. The White House Chief of Staff says Trump called fallen troops suckers and losers and wanted to use the military against American citizens. These are not isolated criticisms from disgruntled former employees. These are the considered judgments of the most senior military leaders in the country, the people who had direct access to Trump's private conduct and private statements, the people who saw what happened when the cameras were off and the doors were closed, or closed all the bathur, and the doors were closed, and they are unanimous in their assessment. Trump is a threat to the Constitution and to the democratic values they spent their lives defending. Now consider the broader ecosystem of retired military leaders and national security officials who have expressed similar concerns. Hundreds of former generals and admirals have signed open letters warning about the direction of American governance. Under Trump, former ambassador, former intelligence official, former national security advisors from both Democratic and Republican administration have added their voices to the chorus. This is not a small group of malcontents. This is an institutional judgment from the professional national security community that the current president represents a genuine threat to the constitutional order. The breadth and bipartisan character of this opposition is unprecedented. It reflects a level of alarm within the national security establishments that has no parallel in modern American history. Conquettery amoris that farfa poveri morig tuor hezeli. The political implication of these warnings are devastating for Trump. He has spent years positioning himself as the most pro-military president in American history. He has wrapped himself in the flag, posed with service members, claimed the unwavering support of the armed forces. That narrative has been one of his most effective political tools, particularly in competitive district with significant military and veteran population. But the public statements of Milley, Matted, and Kelly demolish that narrative with the authority of the men who actually led the military under Trump's command. The generals he once proudly called my generals are now telling the country that he is a fascist, who called their fallen comrades suckers and losers, and who wanted to use the military as a weapon against American citizens. Against that testimony coming not from political opponents, but from the very men Trump chose to lead his national security team is politically devastating, in a way that no Democratic attack ad can replicate. For the 2026 midterms, these warnings provide Democratic candidates with what may be the single most powerful argument available in American politics, when a candidate can stand before voters and say that Trump's own chairman of the Joint Chiefs called him a fascist. That is not a partisan attack. It is a factual statement about what a career military professional, but tier-y professional who served Trump directly observed and concluded. When a candidate can tell military families that Trump's own chief of staff, a Gold Star father, confirmed that the president called fallen troops suckers and losers. That is not spin. It is testimony from someone who was in the room. And when a candidate can warn voters, well, that Trump's own defense secretary said he made a mockery of the Constitution. That is not hyperbole. It is the considered judgment of one of the most respected Marine generals in modern American history. These are arguments that transcend partisan politics because they come from sources that voters on both sides of the aisle are inclined to trust. Career military leaders, leaders who served their country for decades, and who have no political agenda beyond the defense of the Constitution. I think Meltdown from Meltdown, they swore to protect the broader pattern that emerges from these warnings. These warning tells a story that should alarm every American, regardless of political affiliation, a story about a president who views the institutions of American democracy not as structures to be respected and preserved. It is obstacles to be overcome and instruments to be captured for personal political advantage. The military is supposed to defend the Constitution, is not serve the president's personal interests. The judiciary is supposed to interpret the law independently, not submit to presidential intimidation. Congress is supposed to provide oversight and accountability, not rubber stamp presidential demands. And the president is supposed to faithfully execute the laws, not treat them as suggestions, to be ignored when they conflict with his personal desires. Trump, according to the people who served alongside him at the highest levels of government, rejects every one of these constitutional principles. He wants a military that obeys him personally. He wants judges who rule in his favor. He wants a Congress that does what he tells it. He wants laws that bend to his will. That vision of governance, described by his own appointees as fascist, is fundamentally incompatible with the American constitutional system. Here is the final point, the one that captures why these military warnings matter more than any other single development. In the Trump era, the men sounding the alarm are not politicians. They are not media personality. They are not activists or lobbyists or partisan operatives. They are soldiers. They are Marines. They are the people who dedicated their lives to defending this country and this Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. They took an oath, the same oath every service member takes, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And after serving under Donald Trump, after seeing firsthand how he exercises power and how he views the military and how he relates to the constitutional framework that governs the use of that power, they have concluded that their oath requires them to warn the country that the commander-in-chief himself has become a threat to the document they swore to protect when soldiers break their silence to warn the nation. When generals set aside the deeply ingrained military tradition of political neutrality because they believe the threat to the Republican is too great for silence. Every citizen has a responsibility to listen, not because generals are always right, not because military leaders are infallible, but because these specific men, with their specific experience, with their specific access to what happened behind closed doors, have made a judgment that the American people need to hear. Trump is a threat to the Constitution. His own generals say so. And what the country does with that information, whether it acts on the warning or ignores it, will determine whether the constitutional system those generals devoted their lives to defending survives this presidency intact. The generals have spoken. The warning could not be clearer.